Welcome back to the Patriot Quilt Along. This week I share my tips and tricks for making a humble snowball block. This snowball block is a classic quilt block, so you probably already know how to make it, but there are some tricks for making it come out right. It's a very useful block to know how to make. I call it a connector block. If you alternate a snowball with some other block, it connects them, creating a secondary design. So in Patriot, you get these kind of diagonals going there, which is why I use the snowball. To make your snowball, you're going to need a square of blue 1 fabric and 4 squares of red 1. Cut them to the size indicated in the pattern. I will also show you in this video how to make this block if you want to use AccuQuilt. In the pattern it tells you how to cut out triangles basically that you'll be sewing into the corner of your block. So use the die indicated in the pattern and cut out your triangles, and when we go to the sewing machine I'll show you how those particular AccuQuilt cut triangles make the connector squares. This technique is called flip corners or connecting corners or quick corners, I've heard it called. It's got various names, but essentially what you're doing is you're going to take a square, put it in the corner of your block, sew at a diagonal, and flip it back towards the corner. What makes it a little difficult is sometimes when you flip it back, it doesn't exactly meet the corner. It does something more like that. And I'll show you in a moment how to remedy that particular problem or how to prevent it from happening. I told you you're going to be sewing at a diagonal, so you've got 2 choices here. You can mark the back of one of your squares. Okay, that's there with a marker. Let me get a white marking pencil. I like to use the Sew Line marking pencil. I'll put that in the notes so you can look it up if you want to purchase one. I also use a short ruler, and you just line it up and you're going to mark a line from corner to corner like that on the back of all 4 squares. Once you get that done, you go to the sewing machine and you sew on that line. So we'll do that in a minute. If you don't want to have to actually physically mark all the squares now, in this quilt, there's not a lot of these blocks, so it won't take you very long to mark all the squares. But if you don't want to, one way that you can prevent that is to fold the square and press it. Just fold it in half, exactly, and then press. That creates that line that you need to sew on. So you can take the time to press all your squares, open it up, and that crease is what you're going to be using as your guide. There are 2 additional ways that you can avoid marking that have nothing to do with pressing. You just sew without marking, and I will show you that when we go to the sewing machine. So now that we've either pressed or marked our corners, let's go ahead and go to the sewing machine, and I'll show you I'll sew you what to do there. So we're at the sewing machine and we're ready to sew our corner on. I highly recommend that you go ahead and pin to keep the square from shifting. Also, don't be fooled. Remember to put the sewing line should be diagonal to the corner and not going into the corner. So you're going to be sewing across. So make sure you've positioned it correctly. Now, as far as sewing, you can sew on the line, but a trick is to sew just inside the line. If you do that, then when you press this over, it will meet the corner. And you only have to stitch just inside, like maybe by 1 or 2 threads, so we're not talking a lot. See how I'm going to be sewing just inside the corner? And you can chain piece one right after the other, provided you've pinned your squares. But I'm going to sew off and then switch to the next corner. Show you. And I don't know if you can see, but I did stitch just inside the line here. Now, instead of drawing a line, you did have an option of creasing, pressing to create a crease. And as far as sewing, you're going to be doing the same thing, going to be sewing just inside the crease. Now, I promised you that there was a way to do this without having to mark or press your squares. And I'd call that the no mark method. There's two ways to accomplish that. The first way is with this magic stuff. This is called diagonal seam tape. Let me tear off a little bit. Then you position it in front of your needle. Make sure that's exactly straight on. Yeah, it's not. So I use a ruler. If I put the line of my ruler here and it goes straight up this line, then I know that this is coming straight out from the needle. So just make sure you've got it positioned correctly. Then, let me take another square, this one. I'll just put it in this next corner here and pin. Okay, and what you do is you're going to use this red line, which is straight onto the needle, to help you guide your stitching, and you're going to be putting the corner of your square right on that. And then as I move up, this point is also going to be on the red line. So let me show you how that works. So down here, I've got this point and it's on the red line. That helps me sew straight across. It doesn't help as much. I guess with a few modifications you can sew just inside this line, but maybe with the way I position the tape I could have done that. So that's one way to sew without marking. Let me show you the other way. Is basically same method. Let me sew off here. No marking. But instead of that, we use a little device called a sewing machine laser. It's got this, which is an on-off switch. I'll turn it on. And then underneath it's got Velcro, and the Velcro is attached to the top of my sewing machine. So I just fit it on. There. There, get it straight onto the needle, and then I'm going to just use that laser as my guide. So I follow the laser, put my point on the laser, and I won't sew this again, but keep following the laser and it will allow you to sew exactly down the diagonal of that square, and you're not marking at all. So sewing machine laser, I will, whoops, I keep bumping it. I will link to that in the video description so you can take a look at the product and decide if you want one yourself. Pretty easy, I love it. Or you can buy the diagonal seam tape, and I'll show you where you can get that as well. Those are two ways you can save time with these things. Not just snowball blocks, but anything where you're doing a connecting corner, or flip corner as I call them. The last thing I will show you before we go, oh, we can leave that there, I guess it doesn't matter, is the AccuQuilt method. Now, with AccuQuilt, if you follow the directions in the pattern, it will tell you how to cut out, and you're cutting out triangles. You're basically cutting out the triangles from the half square triangle die. And so they'll look like this. And you'll want to put them right side down in the corner. And notice that they are notched. I'm going to get that laser out of the way so you can see better. There's notched here and there. So the little dog ears have been clopped off the half square triangle. And those straight edges will fit right along the edge of your square. So that's what you're doing. You're fitting it here, right along the edge, and here, right along the edge. And once you've got that exactly positioned correctly, again, right sides down, you'll want to pin, keep it from moving. And then you just sew 1/4 inch. Right along the edge there. And then when you press that back, that will create your flip corner or your connector corner. So those are the different ways in which you can sew your corners on. Now that we've got that done, let's go down and press, and I'll show you how to trim and make sure everything is correct. We're back from the sewing machine where we've sewn on our corners using 4 different methods. Choose the one that you like the best. Now it's time to press. So my recommendation for pressing is to use a wool mat because you always get better pressing results, at least I think so. Also a hot iron that's dry. You can fold your corners first and then press. And just kind of keep it there to really press the crease there. You can also set your seam and then use the nose of your iron to gently fold that back to the corner. You can kind of hold it as you're pressing. Again, I like to use the nose of my iron. Press back. So press all 4 corners however you like, and just make sure they're pressed really well. Now, here's where the moment of truth is, I guess. If you flip it over, if you see any little bits of red, then at least you know that your fabric has met the corner. Look at the front, make sure that has met the corner. Because the next thing you're going to do is you're going to remove this excess fabric. Here. There's 2 layers of excess fabric normally. And you're going to remove both of them. And what will remain is this top corner. So you do want to make sure that it looks correct. What I typically do is I trim this to size and then trim away my excess seam allowance. I don't trim it first. That's my recommendation. So trim to the size listed in the pattern. You can, I was going to say, maybe I could have rotated that, but I don't think so. But you'll want to trim all 4 sides. If your fabric is not meeting the corner, like really not meeting the corner, you may want to resew it. And remember the trick about sewing just inside the line. But once you have trimmed it to size and you know and everything's fine, then it's time to get rid of this excess stuff. And you're trimming to 1/4 inch. Sorry, this is the AccuQuilt triangle, so that's why there's no 2 layers here. Here's the square, so I'm going to get rid of that one and that one. Sometimes people get rid of just the middle one and keep the base square, because the base square is always going to be 8.5 because you cut it that size. But I don't like the bulk, so I get rid of all of it. This seam allowances here are actually a little bit bigger than 1/4 inch. I don't care. You can, if you want, use a small ruler and your rotary cutter to trim these. So one complaint that people have about the flip corner method is that it does waste fabric. Well, that's true. However, notice that what you're cutting off, especially if you don't do it by eye, but you do an exact 1/4 inch, is a perfect triangle. So what you can do is mark the diagonal and then mark a line 1/2 inch from this diagonal and sew both of those lines. And what you'll end up with are what they call bonus half square triangles. Now, these are very teeny tiny, so if you're not into miniatures, I wouldn't bother, but for this project, I mean. But for other times in which you're using connecting corners, perhaps you might want to do that. So that's something that's optional that you can do if you want. Your assignment this week is to make 9 of these, and then we meet back here again on September 14th to make our final block, which I'm calling the wave, or waves. That's this block. So we'll make that. That'll be our final block. And you've got 2 weeks to make these or catch up with the quilt along. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you're having fun. I know I am. And we'll see you next time. Bye.